The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. My name is Jen Saunders. I'm a program officer with the National Alliance to End Homelessness, and I would like to welcome you to our webinar series on rapid rehousing. We are so delighted today to have our speaker, Ben Noll, addressing rapid rehousing case management and, in particular, knowing when to end rapid rehousing assistance. Next slide, please. To begin our webinar, I will give a very brief overview of rapid rehousing, as most of you are familiar with the approach, and I will talk a little bit about rapid rehousing case management and services. As I mentioned, Ben Noll is the project coordinator with the Veterans First SSVF program with Friendship Place. We'll be providing guidance to providers about when to end a rapid rehousing case. Ben gave an amazing presentation at our February conference on this topic, and we are so excited to have him back today. Just a few housekeeping items. The audio and slides will be posted on our website following the webinar. You can send us your questions at any time during the webinar using the question box, and we will have a Q&A after the presentation is done. We have nearly 400 people registered for the webinar today, so if we don't get to your question, we will follow up after and may, depending on the number of questions that we receive, develop a Q&A document. Next slide, please. Thank you. Most of you are already familiar with the core components of rapid rehousing. I'm going to give a very brief recap. Rapid rehousing is an intervention designed to help individuals and families to quickly exit homelessness and return to permanent housing. It's offered without preconditions, and the resources and services provided are typically tailored to the unique needs of the household. Their core components are housing identification, rent and move-in assistance, and case management and services. And while a rapid rehousing program must have all three of these components available, it's not required that a single program provide all of the services, nor that households utilize them all. Next slide, please. So today we'll be focusing on the third core component, rapid rehousing case management, and an issue that can be challenging for providers as well as participants, when and how to close a case. The goal of this component of rapid rehousing is to help participants obtain and move into permanent housing, support them in stabilizing in housing, and connect them to community and mainstream services and supports if needed. The principles of rapid rehousing case management and services are that it be client-driven, flexible in intensity, and use a strengths-based approach, and reflect the short-term nature of assistance. Some of the key activities can include helping participants resolve or mitigate tenant screening barriers such as multiple evictions, providing home-based case management, and helping to resolve issues that may lead to tenancy problems such as disputes with landlords. Rapid rehousing assistance should end and the case should be closed when a participant is no longer going to be imminently homeless. We will be posting a blog next week with additional tools and resources that community can reference in terms of rapid rehousing and services. And the Alliance has recently released rapid rehousing performance benchmarks and program standards that can provide additional guidance for programs. This can all be found on our website, endhomelessness.org. Next slide, please. So the focus of today's webinar is closing the case, as I've mentioned. This is some of the guidance that's provided in our performance benchmarks and program standards. In terms of closing a case, the case managers are responsible for ensuring that referrals have been made and information on community resources has been shared with the participant. Case managers should provide a warm handoff and follow up to ensure that assistance is satisfactory, and case managers should also provide information to the participants about how they can access assistance from the program again if needed in the future, and what kind of follow-up assistance may be available. One thing we do want to note is that people are really looking for a clear-cut answer about how and when to close a case, but given the flexible and individualized nature of rapid rehousing, it's not possible to give specific guidance that can apply in all cases. I'm going to turn it over to Ben now, who will tell you about what his program has learned and about some best practices that you can use as you're addressing this complex issue. Now I'll turn it over to Ben.
Great, thanks so much, Jen. I really appreciate it. Thanks for that great introduction, and thanks to the National Alliance for hosting this important conversation, and also thanks to all of you for making the time to participate this afternoon. So as Jen said, my name is Ben Noll, and I am a project coordinator with our Veterans First SSVF Rapid Rehousing and Homelessness Prevention Program at Friendship Place, and we are located in Washington, D.C., and our SSVF program actually serves the surrounding communities as well in the suburbs of Virginia and Maryland that surround the D.C. area. So again, I'm really glad that you all joined in this conversation today because I think this is a crucial topic that we don't talk often enough about and kind of really dive into the muddiness of knowing when to end rapid rehousing assistance and knowing when to continue providing services or to close a case. So I hope to give you some food for thought around that today, but also just to kind of provoke some new questions as Jen kind of alluded to. So I want to kick things off by asking you to think about how you are currently making decisions about closing cases within your programs. So I have two case studies that we're going to look at, and I'm going to be asking for your feedback on. Hopefully you all see there should be a little poll on the side of your screen in the control panel, so hopefully you all have access to that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read these cases aloud. You'll also see it on your screen if you prefer to read through the text. And then I'll give you 30 seconds or so to think about whether you would close the case or continue providing rapid rehousing assistance in this particular instance. So I'll ask you to select one of those two options, either close the case or continue assistance on the poll on your side of your screen. So let's start by looking at the case of Albert. So Albert has been living in his car for the past 18 months. You've shown him 2 apartments and a room for rent while working with him, but he didn't like any of them and declined to move in. He frequently goes missing for weeks at a time, and he reports to you that he's out looking for work wherever he can find it, and that he really needs to earn money wherever he can. You also know that Albert likes to drink, and you suspect that he's actually going on binges when he disappears. You've sent numerous job fair flyers to Albert, but he hasn't attended any of them. He's approaching a mandatory 90-day review period where you must decide whether to recertify him and continue providing assistance or discharge him from the program and close the case. So which do you choose? Alrighty, so I don't see the responses. Jen, are you seeing the answers to the poll?
It looks like 55% voted for keep providing assistance and 45% for closing the case.
Excellent. Thank you. So let's go back into our second case study. So thank you to all of you for your responses. So we have a second one, and I'm interested to see how this plays out. So the same drill here. I'll read through this, and you can decide in the poll whether to close the case or continue providing assistance. So here we have Juanita. So Juanita worked her way through an associate's degree while she was living in the shelter. 2 weeks after starting to work with your program, she found a job working as an administrative assistant at a local nonprofit where she makes $1,300 a month. And she identified and moved into a 1-bedroom apartment at $900 a month with utilities included. Juanita is concerned because her position is funded by a grant that only lasts for 18 months. She's also uncomfortable with her rent burden and thinks she could make more money if she went back to school. Her job does not provide comprehensive benefits, and she is in need of health insurance. You have provided her with the information to apply for Medicaid, but she has not done it yet and is unsure if she wants to access public benefits anymore. Juanita has received 2 of the 6 months of rental assistance that she is eligible for under your program. Is Juanita a good candidate to consider for closing, or should you continue to provide services? Go ahead and select close the case or continue providing assistance. All right, Jen, what are we seeing this time? Oh, there we go. All right, 65, keep providing assistance, 35, close the case. All right, excellent. Well, thank you all so much for taking the time to think about those. So here we go. So this is interesting. You sort of saw a 50-50 split, maybe a few more in the second one that chose to continue providing assistance. But this was pretty similar to what I saw when I asked folks this question in Oakland at the National Alliance Conference a few months ago. And I also asked, I followed up and asked who made the same decision both times, so who either closed the case both times or continued assistance both times. And very few people raised their hand. So I'm not sure if that's the case for you all today, if you found yourself closing both cases or continuing in both cases, or if you kind of switched and did one of each. So that was just sort of an interesting observation. And what it told me was that something that I feel like I've noticed as I've worked with case managers within our program and in talking with other programs across the country about deciding whether to close a case or keep providing assistance. And I see two common pitfalls around decision making with whether to close a case or not. And they're kind of on opposite ends of a continuum here. So on one end, I sometimes see a tendency to exit people from services who have yet to achieve key programmatic goals, oftentimes because they haven't followed through with program rules or expectations. So I see this in exit notes like disengaged or loss of contact. I put up there a word that I never like to use and is my least favorite word in all of social services, which is non-compliance, which means that the person is not following the rules that we've put in place for them. But you do see that sometimes as a reason for closing a case. So in this first case study that we looked at with Albert, he has not yet found housing. He's still home sleeping in his car. So to me, that is a situation where assistance is clearly still needed to resolve the primary goal, which is to end his homelessness. So despite some of these other challenges, I would recommend continuing to provide assistance in the case of Albert. So let's swing over to the other side of the continuum, and here I sometimes see programs and staff members who want to hold on to and provide services to participants who may actually no longer need them. So in this work, we care about and we are deeply invested in seeing the people that we work with succeed, which is great. But this can also lead to some anxiety when we are not 100% certain that a person will be stable without our support. And we may worry what they will do without us after our services are over. Sometimes it may be as simple as we keep participants around because we can, because we are allowed to under our eligibility rules. But looking at the second example of Juanita, I see a woman who has independently achieved numerous key goals towards housing stability and has demonstrated success, even if there still are some potential ongoing challenges. So in her case, I would actually tend to lean towards closing that case out. What I think both of these sort of extreme ends of the continuum have in common is that they tend to put the rules and regulations of our programs or the desires of our staff over the needs and desires and best interests of the participants that we're working with. So, if our programs are regularly closing cases of people who have not yet achieved their housing goals, we are not putting those people at the center of the process, and our program can't be working well. If we're over-serving participants and hanging on when they would be ready for us to let go and may thrive without us, we're disempowering that person. And again, we're not placing them at the center of the process. So today I want to introduce a concept that I'm going to call participant-centered case closing. So, I'm sure any of you listening in on this call strive to be participant-centered in your programming and subscribe to that philosophy. And as Jen pointed out at the beginning, there's sort of these different steps of helping people move in and identify housing, of helping them stabilize in their housing. And I think that we do a really good job of putting people at the center of those processes. We develop goals with our participants. We train staff in person-centered best practices like motivational interviewing. You know, our programs are low barrier and we follow housing first principles, all of which put people at the center of the process. But I find too often when it comes to answering this third question of whether to close a case or continue providing assistance, that our first tendency is often to consult our grant agreements or our rules and regulations and to ask what we are allowed to do rather than to dive into what I think is a much more difficult question of what best suits the needs and desires and interests of a participant. So I'm going to put up a few questions to ask ourselves. These are questions that will definitely not always have clear and easy answers. They're sticky questions. But I put them, and honestly, the answers to these questions may be things that we can't always bend on at risk of losing our funding or being sanctioned as a program. But I still pose these questions to you because I hope they can guide us and help set our internal and moral compasses towards being participant-centered in our practices around closing cases. So you know, I hope the questions and answers that come out of this questioning can guide us towards creative solutions and practices that put participants at the center of the case closing decision. So a first question is, does this decision benefit the participant, or am I making it solely based on program rules and what works for me? If we set those rules and regulations to the side for just a second and just consider the person in front of us, let's ask the question, will closing that case cut off important services that that person may need to effectively exit homelessness, like we saw in our first example? Another question is, will continuing to provide services to a person foster dependency, or might it provide a needed boost to get and stay out of homelessness? And ultimately, what this really must come down to, this big, broad question at the bottom is, does this decision help end homelessness for this person or this family? If the answer to that is no, then we really need to do some serious soul searching about how we're making this decision. So again, the answers to these questions are not always clear. And unfortunately, there's not a ton of research on case closing best practices at this time. So hence my eagerness to start this conversation with you all today, because I think we can start moving towards testing some solutions, start hearing what works in other communities. I will add, if you do happen to be aware of research in this area that we may not be, please share that in the questions box or in the comments, and we can definitely discuss that at the end during our question and answer time. But in the meantime, in the absence of firm empirical evidence, I'm going to present to you today what I call better practices. These are things that we've tried at Friendship Place in our programs or that I've seen in other programs, and they're items to consider that have shown promise to us in incorporating participants into the case closing process. So that's what I'm going to dive into next here. So the first is that good exits start before a participant ever walks through the doors of your program. And it starts by being clear about the scope of your programming. First off, it starts by being clear about what you are here to do. Is your program designed to end poverty, or is it designed to end homelessness? Because while these are related, they are not the same thing. And the choice is going to have profound implications over the scope of your programming, as well as on the outcomes that you're measuring to determine success in the program. So as you can imagine, ending poverty is going to take a lot more time and effort and resources, and frankly, different interventions than ending homelessness. Ending homelessness may still leave participants living from paycheck to paycheck. It may leave them with high rent burdens. So if you and your staff are not clear about these differences, there's going to be a lot of confusion and challenges when it comes time to talk about whether a person is ready to move on from your program or not. So clarity around your goals. Related to that question is, what is the maximum versus the intended length of participation in your program. So sometimes I see us lead with the maximum without being clear about our intentions. And in doing so, I think we confuse our goals with our limits, and we can set up false expectations. You know, if I'm coming into a program and my understanding is that I have up to 2 years in this program, then when 3 months in, staff are talking to me about moving on from the program, I'm going to be anxious and confused and probably upset with them. And we're going to be stuck. We're going to be at an impasse because we've confused our goals with our limits. So then finally, once you are clear and your staff is clear and your participants are clear about the scope of your program, simply check in and make sure that that's something that the person wants, that they think is going to work for them. I've seen a lot of frustration and confusion in rapid rehousing programs when it's not made clear to a person that rapid rehousing is not a long-term voucher program and that assistance is time limited. You know, rapid rehousing is brand new in many of our communities, so we can't assume that participants know what they're signing up for when they come to our program. So help them be clear. Make sure it's something that the person wants to sign up for. And if it isn't, it's best to know up front. You know, I find that people primarily disengage from things that don't work for them or that they don't want. So if it's not something that the person wants, moving forward towards meeting goals and exiting is going to be pretty tough because it's not going to be the right fit. And as Jen mentioned, if the answer is no, please help that person know what else may be available to them and what process they would go through to connect with that resource. And as much as possible, help them navigate the process to connect to that different service. So that's clarity in program scope. The next thing I want to talk about is a mantra that we teach all of our case managers within our program, and that is exit planning from day one. A lot of this has to do with what we just talked about being clear about the short-term nature of the program. But it's also about hitting the ground running to demonstrate how serious we are about helping somebody move on as quickly as possible. And you can only do this if you have the time and flexibility to provide intensive upfront services, which for us at our program at Friendship Place means small caseloads of about 15 participants. Because I think you can't get serious about exit planning if your first follow-up appointment doesn't happen until 3 or 4 weeks after you've first developed a housing plan with somebody. So hitting the ground running and providing intensive supports from day one is really crucial. We develop housing plans during that initial intake appointment, and so in order to do that, we need to ensure that our housing goals are SMART. I'm assuming many of you probably are familiar with SMART goals. If you're not, it stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. And I think particularly with this topic of exit planning and case closing, the last two pieces of relevant and timely are extra important because with relevance, the goals should be housing focused, and any goals outside of that that are going to take a longer amount of time are just not going to be appropriate for the rapid rehousing context. And if you set up those goals initially, it's going to make moving towards closing the case very difficult because the goals are going to be outside of the scope and time frame of the programming. So what do you do if there are goals that are outside the scope and timing of the program? Because that's not very participant-centered, right? To say, well, our program doesn't do that. Well, exit planning also is part of the conversation on day 2 and day 3 and day 4 and on and on and on. New goals may emerge and others may fall away, but we need to always be checking in and focused on what are the goals and clear about them and making sure that those goals are related to achieving and maintaining housing stability. So we check in with the participants and see how the goals are moving forward. And when things get off track, we problem solve. So these practices are adapted from the critical time intervention or CTI model, which is where we provide intensive services up front to identify the needs, and then we connect people to housing and start making connections with the needed supports to maintain that housing. but those supports must be in the community in which the person is living. They should not all be us as service providers. If we are the only support that a participant has, then closing a case is going to be difficult to impossible, because most people, whether they're experiencing homelessness or not, me and you, we all need some kind of ongoing support to maintain wellness and stability, whether that's formal supports like a job or medical care, or informal supports like friends or families or faith communities or whatever. Those supports are needed and they're crucial to success. So we identify what supports the person needs and we start trying them out while we're providing case management services. But then we transition that care to the community and trust that the community has it from here. And we can develop a plan B for if one of those supports doesn't work out, so that the person knows who to call other than us if and when they need additional assistance. But I would say perhaps the most crucial aspect of participant-centered case closing is this next part, and that is being transparent in your decision-making process about whether to close a case or continue to provide assistance. And that starts with having strong and clear and written policies and procedures that are available and clear to your staff as well as the people that we work with, the participants in our programs. I'll add that transparency is a key pillar of trauma-informed care, and I hope that those are principles that many of you on the call today are familiar with and strive to follow. When the decision-making process about whether to continue or close a case is shrouded in mystery and secrecy, it really disempowers the participant, and having somebody else decide your fate without your input can really replicate power imbalances that a participant may have experienced in an abusive relationship or as part of a past traumatic experience. And so we really need to be careful not to re-traumatize people through this process, to provide clear avenues for participants to have input into this decision-making process. And so in order to do that, we need to outline and enshrine those avenues for participation into our policies and procedures so that we are sure that they're followed. And we need to make sure that the participants have access to those policies and procedures so they are aware of their rights. So Jen hinted at this again. We need to be flexible in our policies and procedures. Our policies and procedures can't and do not need to anticipate and address all possible scenarios. But what they should do is provide a basic outline that sets forth some guidelines that can be applied to diverse situations, but that can be applied consistently. So making decisions on a case-by-case basis is fine, and it's necessary for rapid rehousing. But you should not be reinventing how you make decisions with each and every case and each and every person. So I'm going to give you a few things that your policies and procedures should address in some way, even if it's in a pretty broad way, just to ensure consistency. So one piece that your policies and procedures should address is when a case is assessed for closing or continuance. So does it happen every certain number of days? For instance, in SSVF, we have a built-in 90-day recertification period. So every 90 days at least, we are reassessing with that person. Or it can happen at a major life event, like moving into housing, or a change in employment, or achieving a goal, or changing your goal plans. So when are you going to assess whether to close or continue assistance? Who is involved in the decision-making process? So is the participant directly involved in the conversation? If the participant is not involved, who speaks up for the participant's interests and how? You know, there may be situations, as you saw in our case study, people are going to often, not just sometimes, but often disagree about whether to close a case or continue providing assistance. So who has the ultimate decision-making authority in the event that there is a disagreement? And then once that final decision is made, how is it communicated to the participant? So who's involved? And then what are the key indicators that you look to assess whether to close a case or to continue providing assistance? So the next slide is going to look at 3 indicators that you may wish to consider. I will say that these indicators were identified in a wonderful case closing flowchart document that was developed by the awesome SSVF technical assistance team at Apt Associates. So all credit is due to them for these concepts, and I will have links to that tool as well as a few other recommended tools at the end of the webinar, and I think they're provided in the chat box as well. So just credit to Apt Associates before diving into these. But these are 3 indicators that you may wish to consider. So the first, the ratio of income to expenses, or cost of living. So pretty simply, how much money is coming in, how much money is going out, and what are the gaps there. So looking at somebody's income as it relates to their cost of living. A second thing to consider is the person's housing in good standing. So are they paying their rent in full and on time? And are they otherwise following the conditions of their lease? So, are there significant violations, or is there a risk of eviction with an imminent return to homelessness? How's their housing? And then finally, how are the community resources and supports the person needs working out? Have the needs been identified? Have the connections been made? And if they have been made, how are they working out? So if you were paying attention at the very beginning to the 3 core components, or if you're familiar with the core components, these actually seem to align really nicely with the 3 core components of finding housing, staying in that housing, and paying for the housing. So I think that's pretty convenient how those line up. They're directly related to our core tasks as case managers, addressing these things. So I'm not sure that there are right or wrong answers to any of these, to what is the ideal ratio of income to cost of living. What does it mean to be completely 100% stable in your housing and following your lease? So I again, as Jen mentioned at the beginning, I can't tell you it should always be this certain way. How you incorporate these concepts into your policies and procedures are going to depend on your specific context, on your resources, on your outlook. What I would say and encourage you is that the important part is that you do address them in some way, so that decisions are made consistently, and so that there is a clear process for how decisions are made. So as it relates to these 3 indicators, I greatly encourage you to dive into the local and national research and evidence on each of these topics as it emerges. So, for instance, we look at SSVF data on outcomes, and that data has not shown us a clear connection between income and returns to homelessness. So we're careful about placing too much importance on a specific amount that a person needs to make in income in order to be stable, or a rent burden that we feel like will guarantee a return to homelessness or guarantee stability. The data hasn't borne that out for us yet. So if and when that data and research becomes available, I hope that we will follow that. So being evidence-based and data-driven in this is going to be really important. But just a reminder that as far as outcomes and returns to homelessness go in rapid rehousing, we know that most people figure it out, even if nearly all of their money goes towards rent, or even if they're only modestly connected to the resources and supports in their community. So how do you decide who would benefit from additional services and who would be better suited to moving on independently? These are some things that you should consider, but how you implement those is going to vary based on your context of your program. So we're going to dive into questions and answers really soon, but first I just want to throw 2 more case studies at you to present them to you. So we don't have the time or the ability right now to have a full conversation that I'd love to have about either of these, but they each get to the complexities of the interplay between the 3 indicators we just discussed. Which is, what do we do if one of the indicators is really strong and the others are weak? What do we do if they're all just okay and maybe not primed to improve anytime soon? I think we can all agree if they're all a mess, then we probably keep providing assistance. Or If everything is perfect, then we close a case. But what do we do with the gray areas? So I'm going to read through these to you, present them to you, and I hope that you can take them back to your teams and discuss and debate them with the people that you work with. Do your own little internal poll. Who would close the case and who would continue providing assistance? And talk with each other about how you are arriving at those decisions. And talk with each other about how you will deal with situations within your programs where, across differences in beliefs and opinions, how do we apply procedures consistently? So when we have a difference of opinion, how can we still trust that we will consistently provide, incorporate our policies and procedures into practice? So here's two examples, Randall and Joyce. I'm going to start with Randall, and you can read along. Randall has been working with your program for 9 months. He was initially very engaged with program services and was moved into permanent housing after only a 2-month housing search process. His level of engagement took a downturn a few months ago, however, and it has been a challenge to get him to respond to phone calls or to meet with his case manager. Randall's only income is the $733 he gets from SSI. Rent for his 1-bedroom apartment is $800 a month. He reported to the case manager at intake that he wanted to work, but several months of working with the local employment services department has not led to any job offers. Randall's landlord has reported that he is a very good tenant and has been a good neighbor, but he is concerned that Randall will not be able to pay the rent after his time in the program is complete. You have just paid the final month of rent for which Randall is eligible. What is the next step in working with him? So that could be closing the case and providing some closeout assistance or continuing the case, and how would you move forward? The next example is that of Joyce. Joyce moved into housing last month after a lengthy 6-month search. She suffers from PTSD after a significant traumatic experience while serving in the Army. You assisted her with applying for a service-connected disability through the VA, and she is now receiving just over $1,800 a month to support herself and her 6-year-old son. Joyce's previous eviction and poor credit made locating suitable housing difficult, but you were able to work with a landlord sympathetic to the program to work around the screening barriers. Unfortunately, Joyce has refused to pay her initial portion of the shared rent this month. Her total rent is $900, and she is expected to pay half while in your program. Several neighbors have complained to the landlord about the volume at which she watches TV in the house. You have encouraged Joyce to seek out counseling services through the VA to address her PTSD, but she has not gone. How would you move forward in a participant-centered way with Joyce? So I just want to leave you with those. We have about 20 more minutes in the webinar. I'm going to come back in at the end with just a few final thoughts and some tools to share with you. But now I'd like to open things up for your questions and your comments. So, what did you like about this idea of participant-centered case closing? How have you been utilizing it in your own programming, and what lessons would you like to share with the group? What's missing or what might be challenging based on the theories that I presented to you today? What are your thoughts about the case studies, or what are your own examples of challenging cases where you're not sure about whether to continue providing services or whether to close a case? What are your own case studies that are emerging from your practice? So let's open things up to questions and hopefully some conversation.
Thank you, Ben. We do have a few questions that have come in. The first is, how do we balance clients who are not actively utilizing services with the backlog of clients hoping to enter the program that are not able to due to openings?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks. So that's a real challenge. So we're trying to do more with less, and we're also recognizing that we don't yet have enough resources, enough case managers to provide assistance to everybody who needs it and wants it. I will say in the world of veteran homelessness, as we are really getting closer and closer to achieving functional zero, as it's being called in some communities, or just getting down to the decreasing the population of veterans experiencing homelessness. I will say that we're finding that some of the people that we're now working with are harder to engage. I think to me that's an invitation to our programming to say how are we going to reach out and engage people. I think that's always been the challenge. People who are able to advocate really strongly for themselves, who follow all of the rules, have often tended to find their way back into housing with minimal supports, with just a little infusion of cash here and there. So, you know, in my opinion, we're tasked as service providers as being the people who walk alongside with those folks who are the most difficult to serve, who may need help, who may need us reaching out to them from time to time to offer assistance. So, you know, it is a challenge, and you know, I will say there are times where somebody has gone off the radar for several months at a time, and at that point we will close a case because we don't know, that person may have self-resolved their homelessness, they may have moved somewhere else. I will say we only do that after really intensive follow-up, you know, multiple phone calls, multiple emails, snail mail, and bringing in our outreach team as well to check out places where that person has been known to stay. So yeah, I think the answer is we just keep doing what we know works. We keep offering low barrier services. We make sure that our case managers are trained really well in motivational interviewing so that they know how to have impactful conversations about change with people who may not be ready to change yet, or you know, maybe at a different stage of change than who are not ready to make that next step yet. How do we help people get to a stage where they can make that decision? So, you know, I think the answer is we're here to end homelessness, and we're here to end homelessness for people who are hard to engage and who don't always follow all of our rules. So I would encourage you to keep reaching out and to find balance in your caseloads as well. So if people have you know, a lot of folks who are rolling and following their case plan really well, then maybe that person's ready for a more challenging case. If somebody has 10 challenging cases all at once, then it may be a little bit more difficult to provide quality services.
Thank you. Have you ever closed a case and then had to reopen it?
Yeah, definitely. So I mean that happens. With rapid rehousing, I think the data, to me, most of the data that I've seen has ranged from somewhere to 70 to 85% of people are not known to re-enter homelessness, which to me is pretty strong outcomes. It's pretty solid, but it does suggest that there are at least 15 to 30% of people who are exiting our programs who are returning to homelessness and will need more assistance. So I think it's worth asking again, when that person returns to homelessness, what's going to be the best intervention. We've seen some folks go through rapid rehousing and return to homelessness a year or two later, come back to rapid rehousing and find success in their second attempt or even their third attempt. We've also sometimes seen with folks that rapid rehousing maybe isn't the right intervention for them and will help step them up into a higher level of services. So yeah, people will come back. I don't think there's any silver bullet that's going to permanently resolve homelessness for all people for all time. So yes, we have seen that happen, but we often will reassess at that point to see what the best intervention is.
Thank you. What do you do when you're unable to reach a client?
Yeah, so that will happen. I think I said some pieces. So I will give major props to our outreach team at Veterans First. They are super committed to making things happen. So make sure that your case managers have a good relationship. If you don't have outreach staff within your own program, then outreach staff in the communities in which you serve, because that is going to happen. I mean, people's phones go off. People don't have the ability to check their email. They may not be around whenever you show up at their house, but be persistent is really the main thing. And there will sometimes be people that you don't find again. but for the most part, if you're really persistent and you keep following up with the places that you know where your participants go, know if they attend, if they have a doctor that they see regularly, try and work with that doctor. If they have a food program that they like to go to, or a day center where they spend the day, go there and check in with them. So that's kind of that would be my 2 cents on that. Involve your outreach in trying to locate people, because they know where people have come from and where they may go back to.
Thank you. Do we need to look at the ratio of participants' income to living costs before coming in, or just at exit from the program?
Yeah, we look at it based on, SSVF rules state that we have to work with people under 50% of the area median income, but as long as they meet that criteria, then they're good to go. And quite a large number of our people have no income when they come into the program, and our outcomes have suggested that those people are just as successful participating in the program as those with income. So, and that's been borne out in SSVF research across the country. So we look at income, but only in terms of making sure you don't have too much money to benefit from rapid rehousing.
Thanks. How can supervisors best support their case managers who are doing this work?
Supervision, which is in the title, but we have a pretty robust supervision structure within our team at Veterans First. We have about 1 supervisor for every 6 or so staff members. So what that allows our supervision team to do, and it's not all they're doing, they're also doing other work in the community and have sometimes small caseloads themselves, but having that availability of a supervisor regularly allows our supervisors to go out into the field with our case managers and give them real-time feedback on where they're doing really well and some areas for growth, and then about every other week or so sit down and do a full case review, look person by person in the program and say, how's this person doing? Where are you stuck? Where can I provide some assistance? And to encourage them to say, wow, it looks like you have helped a lot of these people get into housing. How are you doing it? What do you want to share with the team? So that's been really good. So, and then it also, it helps us notice when participants are stuck before 6 months have passed and we say, wait, why isn't this person in housing yet? Because we've been talking about them every 2 or 3 weeks for the past 6 months. So we know what's going on, and we've already helped address some of the challenges that may be present.
Thank you. How does data inform your practice, and what assessments are you using to prioritize clients?
So our coordinated entry uses the VI SPDAT. We have done some work with doing the full SPDAT assessments in the off chance that the VI SPDAT is not getting total depth of the need, but for the most part it is. So that's primarily what we're using. And beyond that, we're looking at data to see when we first started, like 4 or 5 years ago. We were more hesitant to take on, for instance, people that had no income at program entry, because on its face it seems like, how is this person going to succeed? It's in a short-term intervention. They're going to need something much longer. But as data has emerged and best practices have emerged, that's turned out to not be the case. So in much the same way that Housing First proved that people who are actively using drugs or alcohol, or who have unaddressed mental health diagnoses can succeed in housing, people with very low income can also succeed in housing. And so we've adopted that.
Thank you. When a client is not abiding by program guidelines, how do you approach them in deciding a plan for moving forward?
I would say it depends what those guidelines are. And to what degree are you required to abide by those? So for instance, in SSVF we have some some caps on like the number of months of rental assistance we can provide. And so our hands are sort of tied with that, although, you know, I think creative solutions around that can still be figured out with private funding or cost whatever. I mean, I think there's lots of different ideas that one could approach even with that around that regulation. So, I mean, this concept, I think this is kind of what I'm trying to get at with some of these questions is if our programs are getting in the way and our program rules are getting in the way of a participant's success, then we need to try and adapt our programs, not expect our participants to change. That to me is the participant-centered approach to say, how can we help you meet your goals, not are you going to be in compliance with our program or not.
Thank you. Are your case managers trained in motivational interviewing, and what tools are you using for that training, if so?
Yes, we are. All of our team is trained typically within the first month or so. We use a combination. So I actually do an in-person, about half-day motivational interviewing training with our team. But then we also incorporate other resources. We use T3 online training modules, and those have been really successful for our team. There's also, particularly around motivational interviewing, just tons of free online resources. You know, there's textbook chapters that are reprinted online. There's short videos on YouTube that give really nice basic overviews of what motivational interviewing is. I would say with motivational interviewing, making sure that your supervisors and managers are trained in them and really proficient at it is going to be the best thing, because a one-day motivational interviewing overview is not going to do much for your program. It needs to be something that's implemented at all levels of service provision and something that you're practicing and getting feedback on day to day.
Thank you. We're getting a lot of requests.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to let you know we're getting a lot of requests for whether you would be willing to share some of the documents and tools that you use with the group. So I know we have a few more minutes left. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, well, no. So that's why I wanted to make sure I had time to get to those. So let me go through them real quick. Before I get to the tools, there's just one more thing I want to say to you all, which is just touch on briefly. When you do make that decision to close a case, just a few key pointers on how to do that well and in a participant-centered way. The first is to be kind. You know, if you follow my earlier advice and have been discussing exiting from day one, this should be easy, but just really make sure that you are preparing participants for exiting and that they're not blindsided by this decision and talk through concerns. And I think there's really neat ways to be empowering with that. One of our case managers developed what I think is a really cool graduation certificate right here that is just sort of a way to acknowledge that, you know, we're moving on, but this is what we've accomplished together, that it is really an accomplishment. So be kind, make sure that people are prepared for exit, but also be clear. So what, if anything, can be expected from you in terms of future follow-up? You know, are you going to be checking in periodically, or is this the last time you're going to be talking? You know, talk through with that person. Who will you call if you have a problem or need help in the future? Because if it's only you, then you're going to have problems in the future. That person's going to struggle with stability. And so you should talk through who will you call in the future if you need help. It can be really, closing cases and exiting people out can be awkward, and it can make us feel uncomfortable. And so to ease that awkwardness or to make ourselves feel more comfortable, sometimes we just say, you know what, if you have a problem, just call me back and I can help out. If you can do that, then great. But in all likelihood, professional boundaries and the way that your program is structured probably mean that you won't be able to. So you do need to be clear about that, because you're not helping anybody by saying, yeah, just call me back again, if you're not actually going to be able to provide assistance. And sometimes, just sort of to anticipate a question, is what if the person says, I'm not ready? And so if you have developed these really good policies and procedures that are based on evidence and data, and you have a clear process for how you made this decision, talk through that with the person. It's a really great opportunity for a strengths-based conversation to say, we believe you are ready to succeed on your own without us because of these reasons. You know, and if the person still is not satisfied with that and wants to challenge that decision, then make sure that you have clear grievance processes in place and that those are made available to the participant. So that's one plug. But so yeah, the tools that I mentioned, there's an SSVF case closing flowchart that is really, really cool, and you can totally take a look at and adapt to your work. There are links to all of these. So this is through SSVF University website. If you don't like visuals and you like more words, they also have a kind of companion document that looks at each of these indicators for whether to close a case or continue providing assistance, just in more words as opposed to visuals. And there's also a really great document that is really just person-centered to its core that's available through the org code website and their Excellence in Housing Case Management series, and it's called Exit Planning, and it's a really nice, I think, 2 to 3 page document that you can utilize to have conversations about kind of what's next for a person. So I don't know if we have any more time for like one more question or if we need to move forward. I know, Jen, you had something else you wanted to talk about with upcoming webinars. Just here's my contact information. If you all do have questions, I'm happy to share resources and to answer questions. So shoot me an email and I'd be happy to talk to you more.
Thank you, Ben, for that great presentation. As he mentioned, I did want to let everyone know about a couple of upcoming webinars. On May 10th at 1 p.m. we'll be hearing from Zach Brown, who about transferring homeless services in West Virginia. And on June 14th at 1 p.m. we'll be hearing from Homeful, which is a provider in Dayton, Ohio, about some of the great work that they're doing. So we hope you'll be able to join. As I mentioned before, the webinar and slides will be posted on our website shortly, and that's endhomelessness.org. And thank you again to Ben. This has been great.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.